So in a match to qualify these teams for the top 4, XSET and FPX were in the 3rd map in the final, what could have been the final round, round 24, and the turret bugged out in a way that we've all seen turrets bug out before, and FPX won the map and won the series and qualified for the top 4, except did they really? Because then they got dragged back to the stage to replay the round. So let's just play the clip. Let's just play the clip. So this is FPX in a, I mean, right, so after this kill, right, so after this kill, it's a 3v2 post plant for XSET, and they're in a position where they're favored, for sure, to take this to overtime. They don't know where the players are. The players could be Heaven. The players could be Tree at this point. And they have one smoked off in A main. They double up towards Generator, and Aaron puts a turret up. Angel hears the turret going up. At this point, they still don't know where any of the players are. Angel walks out, and this triggers the turret, but then Angel gets behind the point of view. Angel swings. Because Angel broke the line of sight, the turret goes back to facing perfectly forwards, which is normal turret behavior. Def thinks there's somebody up on Heaven because the turret shot in that direction, because it just happens to be looking directly at directly at Heaven. And Angel breaks the turret. Angel smokes off here as well. Now, something that Chronicle was talking about too is, at this point, XSET still don't know that there's nobody Heaven. They don't know that both of these players are coming through here. The smoke could have been from Angel had he cast it on Heaven, and the person that broke the turret could be the same person that just threw this haunt. So the only thing that they know is that there was one there until just then, when Angel gets spotted and takes some damage. And now they still keep looking at Heaven. Even though they did damage to the Omen, and they know that the haunt was thrown from Tree. So, crucially here again, the thing to point out is that this round was replayed because the turret was supposed to have given information that was incorrect over to XSET, but XSET actually had the info that they needed to be able to commit all of their bodies towards watching in this direction. At this point. Def is still watching Heaven here. And then at the point at which Angel kills Second in the smoke, Def realizes they're both on site. Def dies. Oops. Def dies. And FPX win. Yada, 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 yada. And then it all gets overturned. It all gets overturned because of the turret bug, ostensibly, as well. Was the damage to Angel spammed through smoke? I suppose that's important to go and double check. Let's have a look.
Do the unthinkable here.
So, Angel's out here. Either way, though, it doesn't make a difference either way, but let's double check. No, this damage comes from Def. Def has just done this damage to Angel here. Look, Def has a pixel angle right here. Def does damage to Angel. This damage did not come through a smoke. Maybe Def doesn't realize that he shot the Omen. Maybe he thinks he's shot the Fade because he can't tell in the moment. But they have all of the information they needed to be able to know that both players were coming through Tree. Now, even if he didn't know, still doesn't make a difference. Because either he knows that both players are coming through door and the turret was completely pointless information that he could have discounted, or he doesn't know both players are coming through door, the turret looks towards Heaven, and he still has to look towards Heaven anyway because he thinks there could be somebody coming from that direction. I suppose you could argue he can play off the turret's contact so he doesn't have to be watching in that direction, but the turret was already up there anyway, and that was what he chose to do. So either way you slice it, to me, watching this round, the turret didn't even impact the round. It literally didn't even impact the round. It's kind of beside the point, though, whether or not it did, because either way, I don't think there should have been a decision made on the basis of this. But let's discuss that aspect instead. So the players all celebrate, they go off, there's like different interviews happening and stuff, and then the teams are kept in separate areas after the fact. Then they're brought back to the stage once they realize that once the admins make the decision that they need to replay the round. The broadcast is kept running the entire time, and then they decide to replay the round. It's overtime, it's fucking crazy, FPX end up winning. At the end of the day, was any harm done? I guess not. I guess we got away with it, but it was a dreadful ruling. Dreadful. And not only is the ruling itself bad, but the rule itself is really bad and could easily have put the wrong team in the top 4. Easily. And I would argue it will continue to have terrible impact if people continue to follow this. So, let's talk about it. Yeah, and it was over the course of a fucking absurd amount of time, crazy amount of time, where, yeah, the players are fucking... The players were tweeting and stuff, right? Like, they had access to their phone. Anyway, we'll talk about it. So, the rule that was cited was, there is a rule in the documents where you can reset the round if the bug has a large enough impact. So, let's start here. This requires the admins to know the game well enough to determine what is a small or a large impact. Because the ruling itself is created where it requires, and it doesn't just allow an admin to have a decision, it requires an admin every time a bug occurs to make a decision about whether or not it had a large or small impact. This turret activity, we were discussing it, and I said, oh yeah, it looks like it did actually influence how Def was playing, and I think when you look at Def, it seems to have influenced how Def was playing, but actually, when you look at the round again, I would argue that it shouldn't have impacted how the round played out, because Def had the information he needed that both players were coming through door much earlier on anyway, and that is more so a mistake rather than using the bug. Either way you slice that, though, it doesn't really matter to the point overall. Other bugs are in the game that also can have really large impacts, much larger impacts, in fact. The KO knife, the bug that's on that, where if you throw it out, it will sometimes tell you that it detected nobody, even though it detects 1. It will sometimes tell you it detects 1 when it actually detected 2, etc., etc. So that's a really potentially large impact bug that's in the game right now as well, and was in the game for the tournament, and did come into effect at various points throughout the year. I can't say during the tournament specifically because I'm not aware of every situation, but same you could argue with chamber dying mid-teleport. That one's weird because one would assume that all instances of chamber dying mid-TP, he was supposed to die anyway, but the gun gets transported away, which can have massive impact on the rounds, and that definitely happened at Champions. Saw that many occasions where there's a chamber, he dies, but he's mid-TP, his body gets TP'd away, there's no gun on the floor, and so, if you're in an eco round, you lose the gun that you should have had access to. That is a bug that could have potentially had large impacts. Other people were bringing up examples of like the boombot the Roombas breaking each other. When boombots tag onto each other, they'll explode. Doesn't seem to be an intended effect, similar, but it is replicable in the same way that the Killjoy bug is replicable, but the devs have said it's not an intended effect. There's a bug with like the haunt going through the floor as well. You throw out a haunt, sometimes it'll just randomly go through a floor. It's very difficult to tell whether that's large or small impact. Impossible, I would argue, from the admin's position to tell whether it's large or small impact, because the information about what the haunt gives, and you could say the same about the knife too, is based on the state of the game as the players read it. The haunt goes out, it doesn't see anybody. The haunt goes out, it falls through the floor, and it wouldn't have seen anybody. Is that low impact because it wouldn't have seen anybody? No, because that would have cleared a whole area. If it throws out and it fell through the floor, but it would have seen somebody, is that large impact? Did they already know that they were there? All of these decisions that an admin has to make are fucking dreadful decisions to be put on the spot and have to decide. It's an untenable rule that has no place in the rulebook whatsoever. And it also means that situations like this, final rounds of a BO3, these are actually more likely to be replayed. They're the worst rounds to replay from a logistical point of view, from a flow of the game point of view, from all of that kind of stuff. But they are more likely compared to other bugs to be replayed because from the admin's point of view, it's much easier to prove large enough impact. If you're trying to prove large enough impact, if you have to justify, let's say to your boss or to a review of your job as an admin or whatever, you have to justify, whenever I have called this ruling into place, it has been for a large impact. Your justification for putting this into place in like round 4, you have to justify, okay, this could have had a large impact on the economy swing heading into the later rounds. This could have been a problem in the future, etc., etc. We need to replay the round here. When it's the final round, the impact, the consequences, huge. This round decided whether or not FPX and XSET went, or decided specifically whether FPX went to the top 4 or not, whether they had to play more rounds with which to do so. And that, by definition, makes it much larger impact and more likely to come under the ruling. And so you naturally are biased towards these enormous, impactful moments, which are the worst for PR, the worst for logistics. And also, you should never just have a rule that has discrepancy between moments based on the consequences of the of how important the round itself is going to be from a PR perspective, right? Because that's really what it comes down to there. Def got an extra flash in the replayed round, by the way. Didn't know that. Fucking awesome. Love to see it. Love to see it. So anyway, the ruling itself, really, really dreadful. And I think there are some really serious questions that need to be asked about this situation, which other people have also asked, of course, which is, would this round have been replayed if it was like round 16 and you couldn't really tell, the economy doesn't really change, but there's a bug, at least according to the admins and according to the Riot devs, it's a bug. Wasn't listed in the fucking bug list though, but we'll talk about that later. Would this have been replayed if it was round 16? My gut says not a fucking chance, because we just haven't had rounds like that be replayed before. We've had rounds that get replayed due to tech problems, and that's a different thing, because a tech problem is obvious that it's occurred, has to be flagged immediately, and there are set rules about it must occur before there's damage done in the round, right? But these bugs happen in the middle of the flow of play, and the important factor for the rule as it's written is whether or not it has a large enough impact on the round. But I would argue that that's not really what's being discussed here. The impact within the round is not actually what caused it to be replayed. It's the impact of the round itself to the overall match. That's what caused it to be replayed. That isn't in the rules. That's a bad way of interpreting the rule, and it's a bad rule to begin with. Would this have happened if it was an XSET eco round where they were in a 3v2 but they weren't favored? Right? They're in a 3v2 scenario, but they're not favored because they only have classics. So you think FPX will probably win the retake anyway. Does it get replayed in that instance? Is that a large enough impact compared to the expected outcome? What is the expected outcome there? How are you going to decide that? Do you have the stats to back it up? Is that just based on intuition? Would it have been the case if it was an XSET 1v5? What if it was only Aaron on the site, holding off 5 people on the retake, but they were all coming through tree, and he just stood there watching heaven the entire time? Would that round have been replayed? I mean, the rule is absurd because it doesn't distinguish between any of these situations. And let's talk about the other fucking one. The round would not even have been replayed if we weren't on the turret free cam. If we weren't watching,
They're on site.
If we were not watching this free cam POV coming up, where is it? It's coming up right here. Okay, if we were not on this free cam POV that we're about to go to, this one, if we were not on this free cam POV, there is no way that this round gets replayed. And I'm not saying that just to try and be cynical. I mean from a literal point of view. The admins are not, because of the limitations of the game engine, the admins are not fucking flying around the map, like seeing everything at all times in a free cam POV, at least as far as I'm aware. The admins are watching the other point of views that are in the game. So the admins are watching the player point of views, the admins are watching the observer point of views. The admins themselves don't control a point of view. I suppose that's not actually a technical limitation. I suppose that could be a thing where you just give the admin a free cam observer. And there's no replay system, anything like that. So that, there's very limited ways of doing this, which means that for bugs that require visual confirmation, you need the visuals. You need to see this. If we were watching Zekken's point of view right now, or if the free cam was, behind Shao and Angel looking dynamically through tree or something, there wouldn't have been a player that was particularly paying attention or watching the turret happen. And because it's a ruling that requires somebody to notice it, flag it, and send it up the chain, it's literally biased based on what points of view you're even able to observe. And especially for something like this, where you actually need to see the turret flicking from multiple directions, and then the consequence of a player, if indeed it was even, if it was even influencing the round. The other thing to point out here as well is, this isn't even possible with stuff like the KO bug. The KO knife bug, you can't even see that a bug has occurred. If you're an admin that's trying to apply this ruling to that bug, it doesn't even come up. There's a different problem with the UI at the moment where it doesn't show on your teammate's POV who you suppressed. So if no one's spectating the KO, no one knows. And also, no one might be spectating the other players that got suppressed. They just have to look at the minimap and think, were they inside the radius? Maybe they were on the edge and they just didn't get suppressed. Maybe it's accurate. Like, it's unverifiable. So it's awful to have as a rule. On top of that as well, it requires really competent admins. Even if you wanted to put this rule into the game, even if you wanted to have a ruling where every time a bug happened, you knew you were going to catch it on screen, you knew an admin was going to be able to see it, and you knew an admin was going to have a decision about it. If all of your pipeline was perfect up to the admin gets to decide whether or not this has a large enough impact on the round. If it got to that point perfectly, that would still not be very good, because the admins so far in Valorant have made some extremely questionable decisions. You need to be able to assess, spot, and demand a replay immediately as soon as the round ends, or even flag it as the round happens, so that things like the celebration after this instance don't occur. You have to be able to stand by a decision that's based on a judgment, not a strict definition. No one would possibly want this job. And also, if we're talking about the dodgy decisions that have been made in the past by admins, the Vivo Key to Send ruling from Champions in 2021, an awful, horrendously bizarre ruling that we've never seen before, we've never seen again. Why did it occur randomly, just based on they thought it would be bad optics if they didn't do something about it, I guess? So they just decided to replay the map with 7 rounds given. The justification is comical if you go back and look at it. It was comical. There's also, stuff like in the past, the rule sets between regions were different, although thankfully it seems like that has now been solved. But Soulcast was bringing up an example about being told he couldn't use a KO knife. I think this was also at Last Champions, but I'm not sure. He was told he wasn't allowed to use a KO knife at some point in the past because it wasn't able to be broken by the other team. Let's take a moment to just think about whether the people that give that response to a player should be in charge of deciding whether or not a round has been impacted to a large or small degree. If they don't know the intricacies of the game well enough to know that KO knives are always thrown where your opponents would not be able to break them, like constantly, and that cannot possibly be a ruling. And it wasn't a ruling. They were just wrong about that. At least as far as I'm aware, they were wrong about that. The consistent decision-making from the admins has been... It's been quite a poor track record. And you don't want to put extremely tough decisions on their plate like this. It's not a good idea. I think another big problem with this rule is, from memory, it's never been enforced before. From what I can remember, there have never been rounds replayed for bugs. There have been rounds replayed for tech issues, but for stuff like Sugetsu's wall on Icebox, right? Do you remember the Viper wall? I don't know where the clip is at the moment to bring it up, but the Viper wall that he put on top of 410 where it had that little hole and he peeked through the hole and he got a kill in EMEA. Definitely impacted a round to a large degree. I mean, he got a kill out of it. I think he got the first kill out of it as well. And it was ruled afterwards to be a bug or an exploit. So let's be clear. It wasn't in the list beforehand, similarly to the Killjoy turret bug. They tried to remove it from the game, but it wasn't listed as a bug. It was still in the game. Everyone knew it was still in the game, but it wasn't listed on the big list of bugs and exploits. So similarly to Sugetsu's wall that he used on Icebox, it wasn't listed. Somebody did it. In Sugetsu's case, it was deliberate. In the case that we're talking about here with the XSET FPX, it was kind of a accidental occurrence rather than being deliberate. But the outcome was massively different. So the Sugetsu situation, the round didn't get replayed. The map didn't get replayed. It just got put on the bug and exploit list for the future. Now, that's easier to do for something that won't occur frequently, right? That has to be done deliberately. That wall that Sugetsu placed has to be done deliberately in order to cause that result. The Killjoy turret thing can happen basically in almost any Killjoy turret positioning that you can put it on. If you can jiggle a Killjoy turret from the first 180 degrees, it will cause this effect. It's been in the game for as long as I can remember. It's known, it's reproducible, and I would argue that the bug itself is not actually what caused the reaction from Def. What caused the reaction from Def is his lack of awareness of both how Killjoy turrets work, and that could be an option, and his lack of awareness of the information that they had at their disposal to tell him that there was nobody in heaven. I think this specific instance was pretty potentially confusing, especially for viewers watching it, but usually pros are able to discern that the Killjoy turret is acting fucky, and they don't follow up on that information. By Riot's definition, like the developers saying afterwards, it's not intended to work like that. It is a bug, right? But it wasn't on the bug list. And it should be listed as an unenforceable bug, as in one which simply will occur and you must deal with it. So I'll get to my proposed solutions later on, but an unenforceable bug is something that I want to talk about later. Let's talk about communication first as well. The communication to players didn't indicate that this was a bug beforehand. Not on the known bugs list, not counted as an exploit, anything like that. Can you imagine if it was, by the way? Can you imagine if it was counted as an exploit or it was on the known bugs list? So every time a Killjoy turret was placed, you could just reset a round by jiggle peeking it? Hello? Isn't that obviously a horrendous application of the rule? That wouldn't work. You can't have the rule as it currently functions. Because any team would be able to reproduce this to try and force the bug and force a replay of the round. And if they did it, if they were able to do this, by the ruling, it would only get replayed if it had a large impact upon the round. So, for example, in this instance, XSET, let's say this ruling stands and people continue with the ruling in the future. That means that if you set up a Killjoy turret similar to Aaron's, and it gets jiggle peeked at any point in the round, and you lose the round, you can, especially if you, let me use a more specific example. You're in a 2v5. You place a Killjoy turret, and it gets jiggled by the other team. They don't mean to, but it gets jiggled. At that point, you can lose that round and demand that the round gets replayed. And even if we try to add in it must have influenced the round, I mean, just stare in the direction that the bug happened and just allow yourself to die. And the round will get replayed, and that 2v5 will get replayed. It's a ruling that allows you to just have a free attempt at some bullshit. Any kind of ruling where rounds get replayed only if a team lost because of it, allow you to try and make that situation occur and see if you win anyway. Do you see what I mean there? I feel like I'm not explaining it particularly well. But if you have a ruling that the round only gets replayed if you lose, you can set up Killjoy turrets any way you like, and as long as you win, you won't reset the round. But as soon as you lose, you can start resetting rounds, which is a major problem because the round, it's based on whether or not you're able to replay rounds where you lose, and you're never having to risk rounds where you win. You're just putting shit out there. For example, with the KO one. Let's use the KO one as an example, right? You throw out the KO knife. You throw it out. You're playing Icebox. KO knife goes out to yellow. The KO knife at yellow says it detects one person, but there's actually two people there. You kill them both anyway, and you win the round. The round doesn't get replayed. KO knife this time. You knife yellow. There's two people there, but it says there's only one. You kill one, second person kills you, you lose the round. You're allowed to replay that round. You don't have to replay the one that you won because the bug occurred, but you won anyway. So what it means is you're incentivized to try and recreate the bug as many times as possible so that if you do lose, you have an excuse to reset. It is an extremely abusable loophole that allows this kind of free play approach to occur. And it means that things like this should just never be allowed to happen. The other aspect as well is that the communication from Riot, from Valorant, was dreadful. The communication never indicated that it was, Riot had detected this. The communication was extraordinarily slow out to the audience, who were just left hanging for a long time wondering what the fuck was going on. Apparently the decision was made within like 5 minutes, right? Can I replay the Berlin Grand Finals because of swoop peeking? Yeah, I mean, exactly. Well, no, you can only replay the round actually if you lost. If they swoop peek you and you kill them, then you don't replay the round. But if they swoop peek you and they get the kill, then you're allowed to replay the round. It's a terrible loophole. It's a terrible loophole. But also, the communication was utterly awful. The communication out to the fans was really poor. But more importantly than that, the communication to the teams and to fans about who caused the replay and who reported it invited serious harassment onto players. That is unacceptable. That is incredibly unacceptable. The fact that the XSET players were getting vitriol from not just fans, who fucking fans are stupid. A lot of fans are really dumb and they're going to do that shit anyway. But from the players, because Riot hadn't communicated to the players whose decision it was to replay the round and how they had reported it, that's horrendous. That's extremely unacceptable. Also, the fact that the players were brought back to the stage, replayed an hour and a half or something after the round had already ended. Are we going to replay rounds fucking days later if it's a regular season match? They do that for baseball, right? They play under protest. If they think that something was like an unfair ruling, they can play under protest for the rest of the map. And if they go back and review and it, it did have there was a bug and it did have a big impact, then you can just replay the entire fucking thing days later. It's a dreadful idea and a serious slippery slope. But not only that, but by playing things later, you impact what happens. Someone in chat was saying that Def got an extra flash. I wasn't aware of that. But what I was aware of was that there was more time to discuss the game with coaches, with staff, outside sources. I mean, you could have potentially looked at the VOD. That was the thing that the FPX players were the most upset about, was that they didn't know what the other team had access to, because the entire system had really poor processes. I know that they have said they didn't discuss it at all, etc., etc. I'm not saying that they had to cheat for it to be a problem. I'm saying the potential for cheating itself is a problem, a really large problem. Even in the case of having your coach in the same room as you and talking about what you need to adjust heading into that round replay is a big advantage compared to, round 24, you're heading in there, all the pressure's on you to try and get this to OT. Round replay, you come back, you've had a lot of time to reset your mental, to think about it, to all of that kind of stuff. The longer it takes to replay, the worse it is from a competitive integrity standpoint. And that is about the processes being really poor surrounding this, extremely poor. I think it sets a very bad precedent as well, and this is what the players have all argued about. All future bugs will just be argued by players to have affected a round. Pauses will become much more common if this rule ends up being used frequently, and requests to replay rounds from the middle of maps are going to be plentiful. You know, there's a round that happens, you lose it. Oh, we've got to pause and do a fucking what do they call it in sports? VAR. We've got to do a live replay. Okay, go up to the tape team and see whether there was a bug. The tape team weren't on the right POV, so they don't really know. Or the tape team does have the right POV, but they can't decide whether or not it was. It's just an awful idea to have a rule like this in the books. So here's what I would propose, because I didn't see very many people proposing solutions. So here's what I would propose as a solution. Bugs need to be put into 3 categories. Ones that you fix, ones that you ban, and ones that you leave alone. So in an ideal world, you would fix every bug in the game. That's obvious. But that's not going to happen. So you fix whatever you fix. The dev team have a responsibility to fix whatever they can fix quickly. And that responsibility is, on them to try and fix things that especially impact things to a large degree. But there's some things that are difficult to fix, and the priorities might be in exactly the same, might not be in exactly the same spot. So of course they're not going to be able to fix all of the bugs. So then you're left with bugs, and you can't fix them. So what do you do with them? So you can either ban them, as in, let's say the bugged cipher camera that was on Breeze, right? You can ban it, you add it to the list of exploits, you say, when you're not allowed to use this. Sugetsu's Viper Wall. You add it to the list of banned, you say you're not allowed to use this. For bugs that are in the game, like the KO knife and like the Killjoy turret, you can't ban those. You can't ban the use of using the 0 point. It's madness. You can't ban the use of using a turret. You can't ban jiggle peeking a turret, right? These are not things that you can ban. You can either, at that point, ban the agent outright if you think it has a large enough impact, which they've done before. They've disabled agents before. It's something that you might have to do at certain points. Or you must logically leave it alone. You must simply say, this is something that is in the game. If you can't fix it, and you can't put it on the exploit list, you have a dichotomy. You have a choice of 2 things. One of which is you remove the entire agent from play so that it cannot happen. And the other is everyone is informed that it can occur, and this is simply a reality with the game. And so that's what I was saying previously when I was saying about an unenforceable bug. It's just one that happens and needs to be dealt with. It should be fixed, but until it's fixed, does it justify removing Killjoy from the game? If they decide that it doesn't justify removing Killjoy from the game, then it simply must be publicly shared, informed to teams, and left alone. And the ones that are left alone are the ones which can't be easily patched, can't be easily removed from play, and have small impact, or large impact very infrequently, which is what this Killjoy turret bug is. It has a large impact very infrequently because everybody knows how it works. And if you see your turret going brr, brr, you realize, oh, okay, that's the Killjoy turret bug, and I know how that works. Someone's jiggling it, right? These are information steps within the logical process that players can follow during that period. The KO knife is actually a larger impact, and I think if it can't be fixed, that there is reason to potentially have it removed, because it's not something that you can work around, and it can have large impact fairly frequently. But you can't go for these middle ground rulings where you put a ton of power and a ton of responsibility on admins that have a poor track record of making competent decisions, and especially a ruling that allows people to find loopholes where they can replay rounds where they lose, but don't have to replay rounds where they win. And also a ruling that skews things towards rounds that impact series, because those are the worst situations. Yeah. So that's my people talking. That's where I'd like to see the adjustment be made. And I think it's I think it's actually a worse ruling than the one at Champs last year. It's a less ridiculous ruling, but I think it's a worse ruling. I think it's the worst that I've seen in Valorant, this one. Because of its potential to have an enormous impact for something that, first of all, again, let's bring this back to the beginning of the discussion. It didn't even impact the round. At least it shouldn't have. Let's make that distinction. It probably did because Def changed his behavior based on the turret, but it shouldn't have because Def saw both people that were retaking through door. So it shouldn't have had a large impact, but a rule was activated that required large impact. The rule itself is a terrible ruling, and it could have been applied many other times during the tournament and didn't. It only, again, it's the same thing. There is no line. The line is based on whether or not it's going to be a PR mess. Does that remind you of any discussion we've had recently? Does that remind you of any discussion we've had? The fucking entire G2 discussion that we talked about? There is no line. It's purely based on community perception, reaction, and PR responses. So, yeah. Extremely disappointed about that one. And it needs to be changed moving forwards. It's not a question. It needs to be changed. Yeah. That's ultimately how you repair your image, right? Public relations. Well, okay, in this instance, they don't have an image that needs to be repaired, right? They don't have a reputation of, I mean, maybe for people who are really ingrained in the scene, they have a reputation of making some questionable decisions. But from a casual fan's perspective, Riot don't have a reputation of being a terrible tournament organizer. The fact that Ardis was literally teleporting due to lag in the replay round was not considered as a problem. Shows you everything about how much Riot cares for things that don't show up. Yeah, it's yeah, very, very annoying. The thing that will repair your image better than anything is actually making... So let's go at it from this point of view. If you have a problem... If your reputation is that you make bad administration decisions, your best counter to that is to fix your administration processes. Not wait until there's a big, high-profile decision and try and make the decision you think will appease the most people. One actually gets to the root of the issue. The second is... The second has no long-term improvements, and also because you are doing it in such a high-profile scenario, invites as much criticism as it does praise upon you. It's like if a country was accused of having a bad justice system, and instead of fixing the underlying laws that govern the justice system, they just decided to make an example of a really unpopular bad guy and kill him. It's like, oh yeah, we've been having some serious problems with criminals recently. I know, we've heard it. We're not actually going to fix any of our laws, but you know, we captured one really big criminal, so we'll extrajudicially kill him. That's not... First of all, the decision itself is a terrible decision and super controversial. But you think it's going to attract more public favor than it does criticism, so that is in some way easier than actually fixing the underlying problem. It's a really bad approach, and it seems to be a common Riot approach. Do you think the Viper alt bug on Pipe's Icebox is grounds for a replay? Exactly, right? That's another one of those... I don't even know whether it's really classed as a bug, because it's kind of based on where you're stood and where you're aiming or something. I don't know. But if Riot classes that as a bug, that would absolutely be grounds for a replay under this rule. But it's a really bad... And also, let's think about that one. You use the Viper ult at the beginning of the round. If you lose the round, you replay it. But if you win the round, it stands. It doesn't make sense. You might as well always use a Viper ult in that position because you can never lose. You can never lose a round where you put it in that position. Do you understand now why that's such a terrible loophole? You can literally never lose a round where you begin the ult like that. You can only ever win. It's a free round. That's one of the reasons why this rule is such a disastrously terrible idea. So yeah, I was very disappointed about that. You got the